The rain hammered against the cracked windows of the abandoned subway tunnel beneath Chicago's South Side, where Maya Delacroix had made her makeshift home among the discarded newspapers and broken bottles. Once, she had been Dr. Maya Delacroix, a brilliant neuropsychologist whose unconventional theories about consciousness had earned her ridicule from the academic establishment. Her father, renowned psychiatrist Dr. Edmund Delacroix, had publicly denounced her research, calling it pseudoscientific fantasy before cutting all financial support and professional connections. Now she survived on day-old sandwiches from the shelter and whatever coins passers-by dropped into her worn coffee cup. Her mind, once celebrated for its creativity, now painted intricate murals on tunnel walls with chalk and charcoal, creating impossible landscapes that seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. Some days she spoke to voices only she could hear, her fingers tracing complex mathematical equations in the dust while commuters hurried past without seeing. Dr. Marcus Rivera, a 38-year-old trauma counselor for the city's mobile crisis unit, first spotted movement in the tunnel during a routine wellness check. A former Marine medic turned civilian therapist, Marcus had seen his share of broken souls, but something about the woman crouched beside her wall of drawings made his chest tighten with recognition, not pity, but understanding. When he called out softly, she bolted like a startled deer, but exhaustion sent her stumbling into the shadows. Without hesitation, Marcus followed, setting down his medical bag and removing a bottle of water, placing it gently between them. She stared at it as if it were a mirage, then reached for it with trembling hands. As she drank, he noticed the scars, not just recent self-harm, but layers of old wounds. This brilliant woman hadn't just fallen through society's cracks. She had been living in them. One more pickup, he radioed quietly to dispatch. Priority voluntary transport. When the operator asked about mental health flags, Marcus watched Maya smile through her tears as water dripped down her chin. "She's coming with me," he said simply. The crisis center's clean white walls and fluorescent lights felt alien to Maya after months underground. But Marcus stayed close, never crowding her space. "Permission to sit?" he'd ask, and sometimes she'd nod. The intake team labeled her with various diagnoses, whispering that she was likely beyond help. But Marcus saw differently. He saw how she calmed to his voice, how she traced familiar patterns in her soup, how she whispered to her reflection, "They made me forget who I was." By her second week at the Riverside Recovery Center, Maya began to hum. It started as barely audible vibrations, mistaken by nurses for distress. But Marcus, sitting nearby with case files and an apple from the cafeteria, recognized the pattern. When he tapped a gentle rhythm on the table, her humming aligned perfectly. Then she laughed, a genuine, startled sound that made the entire unit pause. "That's the first real laughter this place has heard all month," Marcus said gently. Maya's face twisted with confusion, as if joy were a foreign language. "Wasn't supposed to laugh," she whispered. "Father said it disrupted my intellectual focus. Said happiness made minds unravel." Marcus felt his jaw clench, not with anger but with the deep sadness of seeing brilliance mistaken for madness. "Your laugh is the most intelligent thing I've heard all day, Maya. It's not unraveling, it's putting everything back together." That evening, she drew again, but not on walls. Using the back of intake forms and a broken pen, she sketched impossible architectures, bridges between dimensions, cities that breathed, gardens where mathematics grew like flowers. Her mind had never been sick. It had simply never been understood. When she attempted to braid her hair the next morning, her hands shook from months of neglect. Marcus appeared at her door with a small mirror from his desk and a hair tie from the first aid kit. She didn't thank him with words, just sat straighter, her crooked braid worn like a crown of small victories. 3 days later, Dr. Patricia Wong, the center's director, arrived for weekly rounds. Maya rose from her bed and stood beside Marcus, arms crossed, eyes clear and unafraid. She had found her voice again, and this time, no one would silence it. Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuroscientist from Northwestern University, had heard whispers about the remarkable case at Riverside. She arrived with clipboards and skepticism, but Maya greeted her with a soft pattern of humming, not random sounds, but a mathematical sequence that tested auditory processing. "This is your miracle patient?" Dr. Chen asked dismissively. Marcus stood protectively beside Maya. "No. This is the woman who's about to change everything you think you know about consciousness." The call came from the Mercy General Emergency Department at 3 a.m. A massive pileup on the interstate had left 12 victims in various states of psychological trauma, several displaying symptoms of dissociative amnesia so severe that conventional therapy had failed. Marcus volunteered immediately for the overnight crisis intervention team. Maya, now steady on her feet and officially enrolled as a peer counselor trainee, heard the assignment and stepped into his path. "You'll hear them," she said quietly. "The minds that are lost. They don't know how to find their way back." Marcus knelt to her eye level, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I've worked with trauma before," he said, "and I'll bring back proof that loss doesn't mean gone forever." She didn't argue further, but when he packed his emergency kit, he found a small origami crane tucked inside, folded from pages of her mathematical drawings. To help them remember how to fly, her note read in careful handwriting, "The emergency department was chaos incarnate." Even with his years of crisis training, Marcus felt overwhelmed by the collective anguish radiating from the trauma victims. His team struggled with conventional approaches while patients remained locked in recursive loops of fragmented memory. But Marcus found himself following an instinct he couldn't name, tracing a spiral pattern Maya had drawn, moving through the ward not in the logical grid his training suggested, but in the organic flow her artwork had mapped out in the hospital's basement level. Forgotten during the initial triage, he found them 8 patients huddled together, catatonic but breathing, their minds somehow protecting each other in shared silence. The medical staff was stunned. "How did you know to look there?" they asked. Marcus held up Maya's crane, its mathematical patterns now clearly resembling the hospital's architectural blueprint. "She saw it before I ever walked through these doors," he said. That night, returning to Riverside, he knelt before Maya in the common room. "They're going to recover," he said softly. "Because of you." She didn't smile, she wept, but these tears were different. They were whole. When news of the breakthrough reached the Chicago Medical Association, the headlines celebrated Marcus Rivera as an innovative trauma specialist with uncanny insight. What the media didn't report was how the success had been guided by a woman society had written off as damaged beyond repair. Dr. Elena Rodriguez arrived from the state psychology board in a tailored suit and rigid professionalism, sent to investigate claims that seemed too extraordinary to believe. Could a former patient really possess predictive abilities about trauma recovery? The board had questions about Marcus's methods and, more pointedly, about his judgment regarding unstable individuals. Maya met Dr. Rodriguez in the center's garden, humming a pattern that wasn't quite music, a fractal progression designed to assess cognitive flexibility. "You're the one they're calling miraculous?" Rodriguez asked with barely concealed skepticism. Marcus stood nearby like a guardian. "I'm telling you." She guided the entire intervention, he said firmly. The evaluation began with standard assessments: pattern recognition, emotional regulation, memory protocols. Maya responded with unsettling accuracy, sometimes pausing mid-sentence to correct the interviewer's assumptions or predict the next question. Her answers carried philosophical weight that made the recording equipment seem inadequate. Then came the crucial moment. "Why do you think your father abandoned your research?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, probing for emotional instability. Maya looked down, traced a spiral with her fingertip on the wooden table, and spoke softly. "Because he feared the questions in my mind would expose the limitations in his answers." Marcus stood abruptly, fists clenched. "We're finished here," he said. Dr. Rodriguez gathered her materials. Maya laughed, not bitterly, but with strange grace. "She doesn't understand," Maya murmured to Marcus. "I already forgave him, but I won't forget the lesson." Later that evening, Marcus found Maya by the window, watching city lights twinkle like earthbound constellations. He didn't speak, just stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder. Sometimes presence was the only language needed to restore faith in oneself. The official report, when it came, was cautiously positive but clinical. However, whispered conversations in academic corridors began to shift. Young psychologists started questioning rigid diagnostic categories. Maya's techniques, art therapy combined with mathematical visualization, began appearing in progressive treatment centers. The letter arrived on university stationery, bearing the seal Marcus recognized from Maya's past. Dr. Edmund Delacroix, department head of psychiatry at Columbia, had written to the director of Riverside Recovery Center with formal, diplomatic language that barely concealed decades of regret. "We understand one of your staff members is my daughter," the letter read. Given her unique circumstances, perhaps a family reconciliation might benefit her recovery process. Marcus was present when the letter was read aloud. Maya was not that, was intentional. When he found her later in the art therapy room, painting watercolor spirals on large sheets of paper, he didn't hide the truth. He wants to see you, Marcus said gently. Not for love, Maya, for his legacy. Her face remained calm as she continued painting. Will you let him take me back to who I was before? Marcus knelt beside her easel. Not in this lifetime, but Maya wasn't passive in her response. That afternoon, she walked into the center's main conference room unannounced, wearing her peer counselor badge and carrying a half-finished painting, a spiral that seemed to pulse with movement despite being static watercolor. I wish to make a statement, she said quietly. The room fell silent. She raised the painting. This was my mind circular, dismissed as chaotic. He wanted me hidden because I didn't think in straight lines. But in this place, with this man, she gestured toward Marcus, I learned that different doesn't mean defective. It means necessary. The room remained quiet. Then Dr. Wong stood slowly, noted and entered into the record. She said with unmistakable respect. When Maya returned to her room, she found something on her bed, an official certificate naming her as a certified peer support specialist, signed by the state board. Not charity, but recognition of her actual contributions. She held it carefully, and when Marcus found her there, shoulders trembling with emotion, he didn't ask questions. He simply said, looks better on you than any diploma ever looked on anyone. For the first time since being cast out from her old life, Maya felt truly whole. She had a place in the world again, and this time, it was built on the foundation of who she actually was, not who others demanded she become. 6 months later, Maya opened the Spiral Mind Institute in a converted warehouse on Chicago's North Side, a clinic for unconventional thinkers, for artists mistaken for unstable, for minds that process reality in ways that challenge standard definitions of normal. Marcus worked beside her, not as her doctor, but as her partner in every sense that mattered. Together, they created space for people who saw the world differently, who drew maps others couldn't read, who heard music in mathematics and found poetry in chaos. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the institute's rooftop garden, Maya sketching constellations in the dirt while Marcus sipped coffee from chipped mugs. They rarely needed words anymore. Silence had become their most sacred language. You saw all of me from the beginning, Maya said one night, looking up from her drawings. Marcus smiled, watching her fingers create impossible beauty from simple dust and moonlight. I never saw anything else, he replied. Above them, the city lights pulsed in gentle rhythms that matched the beating of two hearts that had found each other in the spaces between broken and whole, between lost and found, between the person the world expected and the person each had always been.